Hello folks, welcome to the canal channel Jose. Today's topic is about fans. The cooling fans on your car are very critical, but before we start getting into the differences between a pusher and a puller or mechanical, we're going to talk about how important these are for your engine. The radiator is the component, the key component for getting the heat transfer from the engine to dissipate that heat, but it's not going to do it by itself. The radiator needs assistance from the fans so they can create that wind. So while you're in a stop sign or a light and the engine is creating all that heat from the combustion and the friction and all that, it's just a ball of metal, but inside there's a chamber, and it's the coolant that absorbing all that heat. Once the thermostat and the water pump start doing their job normally, it's always a cycle that thermostat opens and the water pump helps the liquid to go from the engine to be transferred to the radiator. So now the radiator is responsible to dissipate the heat, but it's not going to do it by itself. It needs assistance from the fan. And that's when these guys are so important to turn on and off when they're electrical. So then the coolant now at the radiator starts dissipating the heat, so the coolant becomes cooler than what's at the engine, and then the process it goes again. And it's always a process. It's a process that repeats itself over and over, trying to keep that engine cool. And that's when these components, the radiator and the fans, come in play, and they're very critical on that. Like on our 66 Dodge Charger, these older cars, they have a mechanical cooling fan. So what that means, the engine, the main pulley has a belt that goes around, and there's other components like the AC, power steering, and there's a fan in there, and that fan has a pulley that the belt goes through, so it grabs other components, and as the crankshaft or the pulley spins, that whole components that is attached to the belt, it spins. So that fan will not spin if the belt rips. So that's the older technology, and those fans are very critical to be attached to the belt. But in today's day, for most part now, they're electrical fans. So for your regular car, they're going to be working out of 12 volts. So these components work when some of the sensors and the engine start reading that a high temperature. When these guys get the voltage, all they do is they just turn on, they start pulling air or they start pushing air. So that's all they do. And when the sensor starts reading that there's a temperature drop and it has reached a lower level, so then that sensor stops sending the power to these fans, so they stop working until they are required to work again by the sensor. So the sensor is telling these guys to work or when to work or when not to work, so that way they keep the engine temperature low. You're trying to replace a fan or you're trying to upgrade from mechanical to electrical fan, but then you start buying fans and then you make this mistake. You want to watch out if it's a puller or a pusher fan. So a puller, that means that the fan has to go inside between the engine and the radiator, so that goes between there. If you're replacing a mechanical fan with an electrical fan and it's a puller, it needs to go right in there. But if you're buying a pusher, that means that that fan goes in the outside. It goes between the grill and the radiator, so that goes in the front part of the radiator. That's a pusher. So if just because you bought a pusher and you don't want to spend any more money and you just decide to put it as a puller and you flip the positive and negative to make it spin the opposite, it's not going to do any cooling. You're going to have overheating problems because that fan meant to be a pusher, not a puller. So you gotta be careful when you're buying a fan to put on your car. If it's gonna be after the radiator towards the engine compartment, you wanna put a puller, and if it's gonna be before the radiator on the front, that's gonna be a pusher. So that's the two big differences between these two fans. Not just because they look like they can do the cooling, you wanna make sure that, because sometimes you don't have the space behind the radiator or in front, so you wanna buy the right one. Pusher or puller, remember those two words because they can make a big difference on the overheating on your car. Be careful when you're buying fans for your car. If you're trying to upgrade from a mechanical to electrical fans, be sure to buy the right one, because sometimes you gotta put it between the engine and the fan, so that's gonna be a puller. But sometimes you don't have that much space for an electrical fan, you gotta put it between the radiator and the grill, so that will be a pusher. So it's pushing the air into the radiator, and the puller is pulling through the radiator. So that's why it's pusher or puller. So that way you spend a lot of money on a fan that is not gonna work, and now you gotta go back and buy the right one to make it work on your car, but you're stuck with the fan that is not gonna work. So be careful, pusher and puller. So that's the two types of electrical fans, pusher or puller. Pusher, you got your radiator, fan, it pushes the air through the radiator so it cools down the fins. Puller is behind the radiator, So it pulls the air, so it goes through the radiator and it pulls all that out, so it cools down the radiator. So that's the two main difference between these two fans. So that way, when you go buy it, they don't tell you that you gotta use this when you know that you can't use that. So with that said, for folks who are watching our video and haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe. If you like our video, give us thumbs up, share it, and we'll see you soon with more videos here in el canal del Chano Jose.